gang?
I'm doing great. I'm doing great. We can go ahead and jump into it. I want to thank everyone that's watching here today. Again, huge thank you to our guest today, Kevin Carr. This guy wears a lot of hats in his career. As you'll find out as we start to talk, a lot of you probably know him from Mike Boyle Strength and Conditioning, the Certified Functional Strength Coach certification. He hosts a podcast. He's a traveler, which we'll might talk a little bit about here. And his direct tie to Human Kinetics here is he is a co-author of Functional Training Anatomy. Don't worry, you're not having deja vu. I know this came out, I think, in 2022. But this is one of our best sellers, and it's such an important topic that we wanted to take advantage of the opportunity to have Kevin back on here to talk a little bit about it and really just talk about training, functional training, and what that really means. So thank you so much. Again, we appreciate your time. I know that you have a very busy schedule. But for anyone that might not be familiar with you, maybe they're just getting into the industry, maybe they're, kind of new to training. If you could kind of give us a little bit of background on, who you are, what led you to this point, and how you got into training and the career that you're in now.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. So I've been strength and conditioning coach, personal trainer here at Mike Boyle Strength and Conditioning since about 2008. So about 15 years.
Good.
I've done a little bit of everything here, from coaching kids as young as 11 years old up through professional and collegiate athletes, and then everyday Gen Pop personal training. I still see clients on a daily basis. And in about 2013, myself and Brendan Rearick started Movement is Medicine, which is where I am now in my office, massage therapy and rehab clinic located right at Mike Boyle Strength and Conditioning. We have a few therapists here that work on a daily basis as well. So we work, using manual therapy skills, combining with exercise to help kind of move people back to training and whatever their athletic endeavors they're passionate about. So I kind of bounce between the performance training and rehab stuff on a daily basis, as well as, providing education through Certified Functional Strength Coach. So like you said, a lot of jobs under really one roof.
It all sounds interesting. I mean, it's all encompassing. Like you're like you said, under one roof, but you're working in multiple areas, I guess. So like I said, you have been busy. You've been traveling around a little bit. I think you were at Perform Better. I know you we're traveling a little bit for the Certified Functional Strength Coach certification, if I have that right. And we'll get a little more into like what functional training and what functional anatomy mean, but as far as your interactions, first, how were your travels? And I guess what were some of your takeaways from those events that you were at?
Yeah. So I the last few months have been busy. So I was in Lebanon, in Slovakia in June, teaching CFSC level 1 and 2. And then in June, end of June into July, I was in Italy and Serbia, teaching those events as well. So yeah, I mean, we teach in all, pretty much we've been in a majority of countries around the world running the certification courses, and it's always great. Part of my enjoyment is I get exposure to so many different coaches with so many different backgrounds, whether it's within Gen Pop training or different sports. So for me as an educator, it's very helpful, and you get to learn, I learn as much as everyone else when I get to go and travel these courses. So for me, it's really enjoyable. And I was just in Perform Better this past weekend, as well as at the East Bank Club in Chicago, providing some education as well. So I frequently am on the road, thankfully staying put here for the next few months, but we're always teaching courses somewhere.
Okay. Like I said, we're going to get more into like functional training and functional anatomy. Like we kind of talked a little bit about prior to this, I think those are relatively simple terms maybe, but sometimes they can be misinterpreted, I think. And maybe that depends on the audience that you're talking to. So how can you describe what functional training means and maybe include what functional anatomy means in those terms?
Yeah. So, I mean, functional training is definitely a buzzword in the fitness industry, right? And I think often can lead to misconceptions. I think early on, especially, functional training got associated with, standing on a Bosu ball or like doing crazy reaching exercises with a band. And I think that, some people kind of ran with that idea, and maybe it gave it sort of a negative connotation. But the way that we look at functional training here, in the setting that we work in at MBSC, is if I could boil it down to a single word, it would be purposeful. Meaning, we're selecting exercises to improve a specific outcome in basing those exercise selections on the structure and the function of the human body. Right. And so that doesn't mean you have to use a certain exercise or a certain type of exercise, but that we're being thoughtful in the why behind every exercise that we choose and we put into a program. I think often in fitness, people just choose what they like or choose what's trendy or what's cool, as opposed to really sitting down and auditing their program selection and saying, hey, I'm going to choose this exercise because I want to improve X. And so for us, functional training can mean a lot of different things depending on the client that you're working with. I mean, I always think sometimes the biggest critics of functional training are sometimes the traditional strength crowd, right? Power lifters, Olympic lifters. But for them, functional training is back squatting or it is Olympic lifting because they're trying to improve that outcome. So that fits under functional training if you're thinking about the clientele. Now, my thought process is the majority of people I work with, and probably the majority of people most trainers work with, are the average Gen Pop client who wants to improve their activities of daily living, generally just feel better and move better throughout the day, or competitive athletes who are going to have a lot of overlap in what their demand is. And so for us, that selection probably means biasing towards, single leg lower body exercises and generalized basic strength, and taking into the account, the planes of motion that our body goes through outside of just the sagittal plane. So when you think about functional anatomy, right, I would say functional anatomy is gross anatomy. So what you see behind me, right, what you learned in a textbook when you were in your anatomy 101 class in college, but then taking into account the variable planes of motion, the intended function, and then thinking about what we're trying to improve, because what you see from an anatomy in a supine position on a table might be very different than what somebody's doing when they're on their feet and they're moving through space. And thinking about, hey, why do we want to choose this exercise? Because of trying to target specific joint positions, trying to target specific muscle groups, and trying to get specific outcomes from an exercise. And so just thinking a little bit deeper behind the anatomy and the exercise selection, I think, is really what comes to defining, functional training and functional anatomy.
Okay, I think those are all great points, because I would say, I think from my perspective, unless you're a bodybuilder, maybe working specifically on hypertrophy, like you want to, a lot of people, I think, want to be able to get into the gym, get their work done and get out. You don't want to waste your time. I think from my experience, especially training maybe some younger athletes, they ask tons of questions like, why am I doing this? Like, why do I need to do this? Maybe they're trying to get out of an exercise. I don't know, but that could definitely be the case. But I think if you are a good trainer, a thoughtful trainer, I think that really kind of puts things into perspective. Like, why am I programming this specific exercise? Like, how is that specifically gonna help the person? So I think that all makes complete sense there. What are I guess in terms of functional training, what have you seen as maybe some differences or a lot of the similarities between training maybe a Gen Pop client compared to an athlete?
I would say similarities. It's really funny when I say, the definition I gave, right? Purposely selecting exercises to improve a specific outcome. Yeah. The reality is that specific outcome is pretty general when it comes to Gen Pop and athletes. There's a lot of overlap. I always go back to that idea of the 80-20 rule, that Pareto principle. Yeah. And if you look at the programs for our adults and you look at the programs for our athletes, there's a lot of similarities. There's going to be some differences in the intensity or the volume of the exercise selection sometimes. But generally, they're going to be full body programs, meaning every day we're going to push, we're going to pull, we're going to do some knee dominant, some hip dominant, and some trunk-based or core-based work. And we're going to still prioritize probably unilateral work for both when you think about the fact that life is primarily lived one leg at a time, right? I would say, like, there's only one bilateral sport, and it's rowing. Everything else is primarily unilateral. And for people to have multiplanar hip stability and balance and strength on one leg in everyday living is hugely important, especially as we start to head past 50, 60, 70 years old. We know accidental falls are a risk, and in sports especially, most people get hurt on one leg, decelerating. So when you think about the lower body training, there's a lot of similarity in how we train both our adult general population clients and our athletes. I'd say the biggest difference when we talk about functional training or thoughtful application of exercise is things like sprinting and plyometrics. Generally, with our general population clients, we're going to be much more conservative in our approach as far as volume and type of plyometrics. With our athletes, we're going to be much more aggressive because of the demand that they need to face when they get into sports. So we're going to focus with our athletes much more on single leg hopping and bounding and multi-directional hopping and bounding, whereas with the adults, pretty general lower impact choices, because you start to take that risk versus reward idea. And with our athletes, from a specificity standpoint, we're going to sprint every day. That's one thing that we've changed a lot recently, is that if you want to get fast, I would say that you have to sprint fast, like you have to practice it. And so with the athletes, pretty much on a daily basis, we're doing some timed acceleration work. As with the adults, that risk versus reward tends to sway the other direction as we start to hit higher velocities. So we're going to do kind of lower intensity based running work. But other than that, I would say the programs, there's a lot of overlap more than anything else.
Have you seen that as a misconception? Maybe just traveling around, talking to different coaches, different people. I'll admit, like early in my career, I was a little naive, and I thought, you know, training athletes was going to be completely different than training Gen Pop clients. I think for me, when it started to click, was I have a Gen Pop client. I mean, she's getting ready to turn 75 years old now. On the other hand, I still train, you know, athletes 8 years old all the way up through college. And I started to notice like some of the issues my older client was having, you know, shoulder issues, hip issues, whatever. I started to realize, hey, those are some of the same issues that some of my younger athletes have too. And then it finally started to click. Have you found that as a kind of a misconception across the board from different people you've talked to?
It's funny. A lot of these things, when I travel a lot, you see some of these misconceptions that people have. And this is something I touched on when I was just in Europe a lot last week, is they don't have as much of a fitness culture as America, right? Like in America, there's a lot of people who train Gen Pop clients, work at health clubs, work with everyday people. I find when I train in Europe, they're almost all sport-based coaches that we work with, strength and conditioning coaches. And so for them, when they almost think like, oh, I wouldn't want to train Gen Pop people. And when they come here sometimes and they see our adults training and see our athletes training side by side, and they're like, oh my God, like these people are so impressive. And they're doing a lot of the same things as the athletes. And I say, that's how it should be. Right? That's the goal, right? And generally, when you train them that way, you get better outcomes. They feel better. They're more resilient to the training stress. And so I always invite people, whenever we go and teach workshops and teach certifications, I say, we always have an open invitation, if anyone's listening to this, for people to come visit MBSC. It's a learning facility as much as a training facility. And so I would say, come and watch, because you'll be able to see, you know, what we think is the best approach for training general population, and how it's going to be very similar as far as the things that we apply, whether it's power training, conditioning, strength training, how much overlap there actually is between those two populations.
Yeah. So how has being there kind of shaped your career, or shaped your, I guess your knowledge? Like you said, you have been there since, I think you said 2008, was it? And I mean, you've got to learn through that system. I know that's one of the systems that I learned through. A lot of people, especially when they're starting out, will learn through that system. So how has that kind of helped you in your career, just kind of learn those basic principles?
You know, I was very fortunate that this was really my first exposure to strength and conditioning. When I was like 18, 19 years old, I started working at Gold's Gym in my hometown, Maynard, Massachusetts. And I was a typical kid. Like my workout was, I'd open up Muscle and Fitness, and I would be like, this is what Jay Cutler did for legs today. And so I'd do that, right? That was like my first couple of years. And then someone had referred me here when I was like 18, 19 years old to start an internship when I was about to go to college for kinesiology. And I walked into this place, and this was my first exposure. And so I was kind of a blank slate, which was very fortunate, because sometimes you learn habits that you have to unlearn, or learn practices that you have to leave behind. And for me, I was an empty box to put all the information in, so to speak. So, I mean, it's been hugely impactful for me, and a lot of great mentors. I mean, obviously Mike, but when you talk about other people who have learned through this, like when I started here, I think about the coaches who were working here when I started. It was Nicole Rodriguez, who's carved a great career for herself, Jamie Rodriguez, who's been with a number of professional organizations, Devin McConnell, Anthony Mirando, like I could name a million, who Josh Bonatal, who have gone on to do great things. And those were peak guys and their girls in their early to mid 20s at the time, who were huge influences on me. And I was very fortunate to be able to learn and have mentors early on. Like you always want to find people who are doing what you want to do and essentially copy them and learn from them. And I always tell younger coaches, like when you're coming out of school, go find an opportunity to learn from people who are actually doing it every day, because it's like a cheat code. Kind of accelerated my career. And now I think, like, I'm 35. I was lucky to start here early enough. It really helped me kind of get on the right path early. And I can't overstate how valuable that was.
Right. So we talked a little bit about programming. Like I said, there are always new people jumping into the industry, into the conversation. Can you kind of walk us through kind of the structure of a typical strength training program?
Yeah.
That you go through, or that you have at MBSC?
Yeah, absolutely. We always say, like, training is a recipe, not a menu.
Yeah.
Meaning, like, you can't pick what you want. And so generally all of our programs, whether it's with Gen Pop, kids, adults, competitive athletes, are going to look the same. They're going to come in and they're going to start with basic mobility work, foam rolling, active stretching, where it's going to accumulate the first 5 to 10 minutes at the most, but it's a really important investment of our time. And as people get older, that investment gets a little bit more important, and we might dedicate a little bit more time, right? The proportion of that recipe might change. Then some sort of active warm-up and general movement skills. So active warm-up to, raise body tissue temperature, wake up central nervous system, rehearse patterns for the competition, and just work on skill acquisition. For our athletes, that's when we teach sprinting mechanics, change of direction mechanics, and that's also just warm-up. There's always going to be some sort of power circuit we go through: jumps, hops, bounds, and medicine ball throws. Like I said, adults versus athletes, those selections might change, but they're both going to do it. Okay. And that's usually the biggest shocker for our Gen Pop clients, is like, I'm going to throw med balls, I'm going to jump and hop. And I'm like, yeah, it's important that we maintain your power and your deceleration skills as you get older. Right. We just might do it a little differently. Generally from there, that's when our athletes go into our sprint work, some sort of timed acceleration work. We time 10-yard splits every single day. And with our adults, that's when we're going to head right into the weight room. And right after the sprints, that's when our athletes would head in. And we start with what we call heavy implement power. So if plyometrics and medicine balls are light implement power, heavy implement power might be things like Olympic lifts for our athletes, loaded jumps for our athletes. And usually for our adult clientele, it's going to be things like kettlebell work, kettlebell swings. Those variations going to be a lower impact of a way for us to get some power development. And then it's going to generally be, for most of our athletes or adults, if they're 2 or 3 days a week, going to be a full body approach. So a main lift, that might be a deadlift, a heavy rear foot elevated split squat, a bench press, something like that. Followed by, typically everything's going to be done in pairings or trisets, going to allow us some efficiency. So non-competing pairs. So if we're deadlifting, maybe we're pairing that with chin-ups so we can get double the amount of work done. And we're just trying to think, especially in a 2 or 3 day program, are we doing some hip dominant, knee dominant, some pushing and pulling every day, and finding out what's the best way based on the design of the facility, right, the clientele that we have, how to spread those exercises out throughout the week efficiently. And then moving towards some energy system development work, depending on where we are in the season. Or with the adults, we're kind of just providing variations throughout the year, because with the athletes, it's training's a means to an end, whereas with the adults, training is just all year, right, all the time. And so, and a lot of our exercise selection and pairings will be, if you kind of understand how MBSC works, it's kind of like a factory. So to give you an idea, today, we open at 5, and about every 15 minutes, there's a group of 10 athletes or adults. And so, hey, how can we set this up efficiently that the next group can come and the assembly line doesn't get backed up? But it's generally always going to be that structure, just albeit at different volumes or intensities depending on the population.
Okay, very good. Now we've talked about similarities between Gen Pop and athletes. We're talking about functional training, functional anatomy. Can you speak maybe to the importance of I guess creating a good foundation when you were younger, and how important that is as you age? You mentioned keeping up on mobility work, tissue care, that type of thing. Yeah,
And so I like when you say, starting a foundation. So we have kids as young as 11 that come in here.
Yeah.
And, for them, foam rolling and stretching, one, it's hard to keep their attention. You got to keep training interesting at that age, as you probably know. You train young kids, you said. So we'll do some of that, but the time we dedicate to it is definitely less than with the adults. But what's important with them is we always, with the young kids, say it's almost like training school, not training. Like we're teaching them to train at that age. And so with our 11 and 12-year-old kids, like we're really emphasizing teaching fundamentals, skipping, shuffling, high knee run, basic mechanics, because a lot of them are going through that awkward growth phase, right? Where they're trying to learn how to move and they're growing rapidly. Throwing medicine balls, sprinting, jumping, things that are going to keep them entertained and keep them moving fast and develop generalized movement skills. And then when we get in the weight room at that age, I'm not very concerned about load. We always tell our coaches, like, listen, we're going to learn how to clean with an empty bar for a while. We're going to learn how to split squat or do single leg deadlift body weight for a while. We're going to learn how to bench press with a 15-pound bar with a couple 5-pound plates on either side for a little while. Make sure it looks good. Yeah. Because then when these kids get to being like 14, 15, 16, they hit the ground running and they can take off, and we can really build with them. And so we always encourage people, obviously it's good for our business, but like if you start in the middle school program, when you get to high school, the learning to lift is gone and you're able to build a foundation. And if you lift with really good form through a full range of motion, there becomes less issue with the mobility demands as you get older, right? And so you're doing less patchwork later on. Like I said with me, I was lucky to start here from an educational standpoint. I would say if you're lucky to start here from a training standpoint, you tend to feel and move much better. I see the athletes that we've had for 10 years or so, and they're generally pretty healthy because they've taken a well-rounded approach. And then with our adult clientele, it's about talking about building habits. Like, hey, you need to invest a little bit more time into your daily mobility work, or just like moving on a daily basis. Here's a circuit you can do on the days you're not with us to roll, stretch, and do some body weight work to maintain your joints as you get older. And so two different approaches, but I think they're connected from beginning to end.
Yep. What has your experience been like with buy-in with some of the younger ones? I mean, they probably see some of the older kids, maybe even some of the adults just like loading up their bars, but you make an emphasis on, lifting with that empty bar just to learn those patterns right away. Have you got any kickback from some of them that want to go and load up the bar?
Yeah, always the boys, never the girls. It's always right. It's complete to the girls were always telling them they got to add more weight. The young ones, the boys were always telling them to take off weight, right? And it's about being able to get them to trust you and develop the relationship early on so that they buy into what you're saying, right? And so I always try to go out of my way the first couple times they're in there to really start to develop relationships with all the individuals. And so that way when I say, hey, Joey, why don't you take a little bit of weight off the bar? He says, hey, can I go up and say, hey, we're going to stay here this week, that they want to listen to you. And then likewise, like I said, with some of the younger girls, when I say, hey, I think you can go a little heavier than that, that they start to buy into that idea. And so generally we're pretty good with that. But if we do have any problems, it's usually the young boys who play football that are generally the trouble from there. But I think I always, like you said, they see the older kids, and I always remind them, like, hey, they've been training here since they were your age, and they bought into it, and look where they are now. And we have a good culture here now where the kids generally really buy into the system.
Something that I thought about when you were just speaking there was the idea of training age, which I think is probably important for a lot of people to realize too. If they're starting at a younger age, then their training age, say they start at 11 years old, by the time they get to high school, their training age is going to be much, I guess, longer than if someone had started in high school. So how important is that? Like you mentioned, getting people to, establish those habits early on so that they're ready to go later on.
Yeah, it's 100%. Like we have some kids who have been here since middle school who are like young high school kids, like 14 to 15, right? So they've been here, 3 or 4 years at this point, and their training age is light years ahead of kids who maybe are at that age chronologically who just started.
Right.
And, sometimes they're peers, they know each other, they play on teams together, and getting the kid who might be a little bit behind to understand, hey, you're going to get there. You're just not quite there yet. Right. And being able to have the communicative skills as the coach to be able to say, hey, we're going to get there, we're going to move you along, and keep them bought in and not let them get discouraged. Because it's very easy for a 14 or 15-year-old kid to kind of be discouraged when they look at their peers and see, okay, I'm a little behind.
Right.
But, you know, and then still also be able to push the kid who's a little bit further ahead, because sometimes they're in the same group. And so as a coach, you got to have that duality where you can, have push one kid a little bit, pull another kid a little bit, and try to figure out, where they fit. And I mean, unanimously, when they start earlier, it jump starts them along the way. And so we're always really big on pushing the kids in the middle school program to get started early.
Okay, so we're talking about functional training, functional anatomy. Part of that, as you mentioned, is maintaining that mobility into your joints. But I think you might agree, like recovery and tissue care is also very, very important in that. Obviously. Something, a unique perspective that I think you have is, like I mentioned, you are a massage therapist. How do you incorporate that into your programming with some of your clients, or do you keep that completely separate?
I mean, I treat them separately in a separate business, even though I'm right next door. But there's this time of the year, I'm especially very busy because we have a lot of collegiate and professional athletes who are training with us, not necessarily with me as the coach. They might be working with Vinny, they might be working with Pat, they might be working with Steve, whoever it is. And we have really good communication between myself, the other staff here, about like, hey, what does this individual need? And so this time of the year, I try to keep a lot of slots open, especially when we're busy in the morning, that before or after their training session, they're able to come in here for 30 minutes or an hour to get work as they need it. And then going back and talking to their coach, like I just sent Vinny some notes on an athlete that we both work with just before this. And I said, hey, these are the things that we worked on from a manual therapy standpoint. These are the like little kind of rehab type exercise we've been doing. If you can incorporate some of those into the program, I'm going to see, him or her later this week or next week. And here are some things you can start to think about. And so kind of having that flow back and forth between us allows us to be more of a full service facility and make sure the athlete is taken care of as best possible. Because especially with our athletes who they're not only in here training 3 or 4 days a week, our older athletes, but they're also skating, going to summer league practices, things like that. There's a lot of competing demands. And as we get closer to the competitive season, little things start to creep up, aches and pains. And so having an open flow of information allows us to manage those more effectively. Okay.
So what are, obviously the best recommendation would be to go see a professional like yourself, but what are some things that maybe some people can work on, maybe at home or on their own to, alleviate some of those, aches and pains and different things that they're going through?
I always tell them on your off day or later in the day after we train, take 5 to 10 minutes to roll, stretch, and just move. Too often, like, hey, they train for an hour and a half or something, and then they don't do anything until they see us the next day or 2 days later, right? And you just get stiff. Like, it's just the result of training generally sometimes. And so I say, like, you can't maintain your joints if you don't maintain your joints, meaning you need to do something every day. So, do some body weight work, do some shoulder circles, some active hip stretching, things to just keep the fluid moving, keep the synovial fluid and the connective tissue, supple so you can continue to move. And then don't forget about all the 23 hours of the day. The hardest thing for us to educate with athletes is, what do you do when you leave here? And so that means you're going to feel better if you sleep more, which is a big problem with high school and college age kids. You're going to feel better if you have higher protein intake and are eating enough calories. And so a lot of our time here, when we get done every single week, we have like an education plan for the athletes. And it's real simple stuff. How much protein should you be having a day for your body weight? How many calories should you be getting? What does adequate hydration look like? How many ounces per day for your body weight and your activity level? How to plan out your sleep and sleep hygiene, real basic things. And recovery is a cumulative thing, right? It's all of those things and the appropriate training stress. And so trying to put those pieces together, because often even some of the best athletes and people you work with are really far off the mark when it comes to how to manage all those lifestyle factors. And when they click those things in, generally, a lot of the recovery starts to take care of itself.
I think you touched on it a little bit, but something that I wanted to ask you about was, you deal with such a large population of, I guess, adults and athletes. Maybe some of those athletes, they're playing multiple sports year round, or now we're seeing more maybe single sport athletes that are still playing year round. how do you kind of balance all of that, and just to keep them healthy and keep them healthy, but also keep them ready for their sport?
I'll tell you, it's harder than it's ever been. Even from when I started in like 2008, we had more multi-sport athletes or kids that had an off season, a real off season.
Yeah.
Now, especially with hockey, basketball, soccer, there's more and more single sport athletes who play on more teams. Like the average high school hockey kid plays more games in a season than an NHL player. Yeah. Same with basketball. They play club all year. And so you have all these cumulative stress injuries. And part of it is talking with the parents and giving them those facts and telling them, like, listen, are we training to be the best summer league player? Are we trained to be the best college player? Because they're two very different approaches you're going to take. Right. And so letting them know that, hey, sometimes some time off the court or the ice or the field, whatever it might be, and some time to recover and get in different movement patterns and just train your capacity can be a really valuable investment. But there's always this fear of, keeping up with the Joneses. Hey, all the other kids are doing this. And then for us, when they're coming to see us, understanding what are their competing demands. So like I have a lot of kids who they leave here and they're like, oh, I have a summer league practice or I have a game. So we're not going to condition. Like I'm not going to have them run a bunch when they're with me, when they're going to go run at practice. Instead of thinking, okay, you have to adjust your programming. And being flexible as a coach to be able to do that is how you can provide the best services without pushing that kid or that athlete over the point of no return.
Right. Would you say it's almost even more important for, I know the goal is to obviously train year round, train, just different components of your fitness, but would you almost say it's more important to train year round for those types of athletes just to stay healthy? Or
100%. It's funny. I had this conversation. I said, off-season training used to be everything, right?
Yeah.
Now there really isn't an off-season. So you have to train in season and you have to prioritize it. And there used to be, it's funny because the athletes and their parents and the coaches have shifted to training year round, but they're still scared of to competing year round, but they're still scared of in-season training. But I'm like, when are you going to do it then?
Right.
And so emphasizing them that just get 2 lifts in a week, right? If you can consistently get 2 lifts in a week, we can get better consistently and we can keep you healthier. But if you're always giving up lifts because you need to practice or play, then we're probably moving backwards from a strength and power standpoint. And so emphasizing that it just takes, you get in here for 45 minutes, we can get the job done 2 times a week. Even if you had a game that day, even if you have a game in 2 days, you're going to be fine. And breaking down that fear from them, that the people that commit to that generally are healthier and do much better.
So what is, kind of shifting gears a little bit, what is maybe a funny or maybe a success story that you've seen over the years that kind of stands out to you?
Well, I've had a lot of athletes and parents and families I've worked with for a long period of time. And, early on, they're not always, they're not, until you build a lot of trust with them and they've worked with you for a while, they're not always willing to listen. Right. And so I had a family where, they had a competitive baseball player son and as well as a basketball player. And I was telling them for years, hey, just take a break from, this club team for a little while so you can just dedicate. Right. And they're like, you really got to play on this team to, we're trying to get recruited. You got to play on this team. The coach said, play here. I'm like, all right. And I would bend over backwards just to do anything to get lifts in. And over time, slowly but surely, the kids would start to get burnt out, right? The kid's throwing arm would be sore. The kid's ankles and feet would be sore, play basketball. And over time, I'd say, listen, just a little bit of time off the court, a little bit of time off the field. And slowly but surely, as they built a relationship and they saw the experiences that were happening, these, parents, these athletes start to buy in because part of the sales is to the parents as much as it is the kid. And now, they get it. They say, hey, finally, they always say, I wish I listened to you, 5 years ago. Can't say I didn't tell you. But, some people are going to learn at their own rate. And it's about you continually, I always tell our coaches, provide education, tell them what we think is best, and hopefully eventually they come around. And that's really how we've built a business that's successful, is trying to work around these kids' schedules and just slowly provide education for them.
Awesome. This has been an awesome conversation. I know you're a very busy guy. I don't want to take up too much of your time, but I want to be respectful of that. But definitely thank you so much for spending a little bit of your time today. I know that I learned a lot from it. I know everyone else watching learned from it. If you haven't got your copy yet, definitely pick up your copy of Functional Strength Training Anatomy. If you are a trainer or coach, this is definitely a resource. Throw it in your bag, keep it in your office as a reference. You're going to get benefit out of it. Kevin, again, thank you so much. I will give you the last word here to kind of wrap things up, and maybe if people aren't following you already, how can people follow you and keep up with all the work that you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me on. It was a pleasure.
Yeah.
Yeah, Kevin Carr right here, my Instagram. As I'm on here, you can follow me. That'll take you to everything else we do. So our CFSC certifications at Certified FSC. You can see where we're teaching our courses. We're pretty much doing a course at least every other weekend around the U.S. Plus, we have an online curriculum as well. And so if you're interested in that, you'll be able to find all my education links if you go right to my Instagram page. And so if you have any questions, just shoot me a message and happy to help you out. Thank you.
Okay. Awesome. Again, thank you so much. I'm sure we'll be talking soon. But everyone else, have a good rest of your day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Yep. Thank you.